Hi folks, Canadian Prepper here. Second video of the day. First was a little bit silly because we like to have fun around here once in a while, but it's time to get serious once again. We got some information that has just been released in the last 24 hours that is very concerning. So I'm going to share it with you today and you can make of it what you will. But it sounds like this is the grand master plan, okay? Now, David Petraeus just came out within the last 12 hours and made the following stern threat to Vladimir Putin. Now, if you don't know who David Petraeus is, he's former Army general. He was a former CIA director as well, I believe. So in some people's minds, not a great guy. In other people's minds, I'm sure they think he's a hero. Anyways, regardless, he said the following, just to give you a hypothetical, if Russia used a tactical nuclear weapon in Ukraine, we would respond by leading a NATO collective effort that would take out every Russian conventional force that we can see and identify on the battlefield and in Ukraine and also in Crimea and every ship in the Black Sea. Now, many are going to contest whether or not that's even possible. Regardless of whether it's possible or not, were it attempted, we need to think about what the potential response by the Russians to that might be. I have a feeling that it would involve a 50 megaton warhead falling on Washington, but what do I know? Anyways, if that is what Petraeus is saying, then you can guess that that's what the US administration is likely thinking. Now, Marco Rubio also said that another possible scenario that will come out of this impending escalation, because we know the Russian offensive is coming. If you haven't seen the video I released last night of the train load of Iskander short-range ballistic missiles and nuclear-capable ballistic missiles, as well as a lot of other really heavy equipment. We're talking about train loads upon train loads, bus loads upon bus loads of soldiers, full-scale Russian mobilization. They are preparing to take over the entire country, as I'm going to talk about in just a minute. But Marco Rubio believes that it's quite possible that Putin could strike distribution points where US and allied supplies are entering Ukraine, okay, including inside Poland. Now, this is a scenario if Putin feels that he's backed up against the wall. As some of you know, if you've been paying attention to the news lately, the Russians are retreating in certain places. They're making slight advances in others, but not so much. Definitely the momentum has slowed down, and it's currently in Ukraine's favor. So if that momentum continues, that's when you need to be concerned about the use of nuclear weapons, which is why seeing dozens of Iskander missiles being trained into Kherson, that's why that's a little bit unsettling, to say the least, because those could at any time be used to shoot nuclear-tipped warheads as well. Not that it would necessarily make a huge difference in terms of the human casualties, whether they use 60,000 artillery rounds or a couple nukes. The outcome is the same in terms of the loss of life. But the specter of it all, of course, would spook the markets. It would cause global panic. And of course, the United States would have to respond. And that's when we do the tit for tat escalation all the way up to the strategic nuclear level, which likely wouldn't be good for anybody, I'm guessing. But they're saying, Marco Rubio speculates, that these NATO targets could be what happens in an attempt for the Russians to escalate, to de-escalate the war. Now, Andrei Gurylyov, he is a former Russian general officer and current member of the Russian Duma. He was recently, in the last 24 hours, I believe, interviewed by a former UN weapons inspector, a controversial figure who I'm sure is on several different types of lists. So take it all with a grain of salt. However, I will say that this individual knows his stuff. And if you want to know more about this particular interview, I'm going to read the transcript for you, and you can just take a snippet of that transcript, drop it into DuckDuckGo or Google, and you can find out more information on your own, and you can come to your own conclusions. Remember, what we're trying to do here is talk about both sides, talk about the reality from both sides to actually get what as close to the reality as we possibly can. So Gurylyov indicated that given the reality that the Ukrainian military was operating as a de facto proxy of NATO, the demilitarization task set forth by Putin by invading Ukraine now meant the complete destruction of the Ukrainian military. So what the implication is there is that they're going to have to go all the way. They're going to have to take over the entire country, and that is the plan with these train loads and boat loads and truckloads of soldiers and weapons that are pouring in to the 4 occupied territories right now in preparation for a major offensive, which is likely to start once the ground freezes, so we are told. Likewise, he says, given that the Russian government has labeled the government of Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky as a Nazi regime, denazification would require regime change in Kiev and Russian troops advancing up to the western reaches of Ukraine that border NATO itself. We know that Lloyd Austin, within the last 24 hours, a lot has happened in 24 hours, it seems. That's the news cycle is on an hourly basis now. Anyways, he's talking about putting more troops into Poland and the Baltic states. And if you've been paying attention at all to alt media, you know that there's been reports, lots of anecdotal reports of military activity, heightened military activity around the United States. So this very well could be due to the fact that they're planning on bolstering their forces out there on the Western Front. He goes on to say that these objectives would be accomplished through a strategic air campaign that would destroy the totality of Ukraine's critical infrastructure, severely impacting command and control and logistics of the Ukrainian military. Why they haven't done this so far, nobody still knows. Some people think it's because of the whole, what was it called again, special military operation and all the legal parameters of that bracketed Russia's capability from their own legal sense to basically do what they fully had the military capability to do. Of course, some people thought they were fighting the war with one hand tied behind their back. I guess we will see now that they're fully mobilized and about to declare all-out war on Ukraine. Grylyov was confident, however, that the reinforced Russian military would be able to defeat the NATO-enhanced Ukrainian armed forces without resorting to the use of tactical nuclear weapons. So, if you believe that Russia is just holding back, and if you believe that they're planning this major offensive and that they have the means to basically wipe the Ukrainian military off the map, then I guess you don't have to worry about them using tactical nuclear weapons. However, he goes on to say, Grylyov was adamant that tactical nuclear weapons would never and could never be used by Russia against Ukraine. He says could because in line with Russian nuclear doctrine, according to their own laws, you can only use nuclear weapons if the threat of the Russians' existential annihilation was there. Okay, so if Russian territory was being infringed on and there was concern that they were going to lose a war, then they'll use nukes. Or if nukes are used against them first, those are the only 2 instances that they could use them. He was, however, less so convinced of the non-use of nuclear weapons when it came to using tactical nukes against NATO. So he thinks that the nature of Russia's military victory over Ukraine will be so decisive that NATO might feel compelled to intervene to stop the Russians. If NATO were indeed to dispatch troops into Ukraine and those troops engaged in a large-scale ground conflict with Russian forces, then Grylyov envisioned that Russian nuclear weapons could, in fact, be used against NATO targets. And the implication here would be then that they might be concerned then that obviously that in line with their own nuclear doctrine, Grylyov is kind of admitting then that Russian existence is under threat if the full force of NATO's military was used conventionally against them, implying that they would lose in a conventional war with NATO. Of course, many realize the superiority of the Russian strategic nuclear forces as well as EMP type weapons over NATO. Grylyov was convinced that the United States, fearing Russian strategic nuclear retaliation capabilities, would not thereafter unleash its own nuclear arsenal against Russia, even if Russia used a tactical nuke. He may have something there because a lot of people within the American military have also said that they don't think that we would respond with nuclear weapons if Russia used nuclear weapons in Ukraine, but that we would respond conventionally. And of course, in our response conventionally, that might prompt even more use of nuclear weapons or targeting of the distribution centers like Rubio speculated. And that, of course, could potentially be where things escalate from there. Anyways, guys, it is not looking good. As I talked about the other day, the Nord Stream situation, we're still waiting for retaliation with respect to that. It's looking like the Russians are being more vehement in their condemnation of Western involvement in that. They have invested up to $23 billion in this, around $1 billion of gas, which has now been literally vaporized. So a lot of money was lost, a lot of time was lost, and I think it's only a matter of time before they hit us back. If it is the case that they didn't do it themselves, and you guys know how I feel about that, it seems very unlikely that that would be the case, but we simply just don't know, to be brutally honest. That's pretty much all I got for you guys today. There's a lot of other little tidbits of news and information that we're going to touch on tomorrow. But until that time, I will say, as winter is approaching, and it's going to be a grueling one for a lot of people this year, if you want us to, if there's any topic in particular that's winter focused that you want us to address or readdress, because we've pretty much addressed a lot of them here on the channel, although, you know, nothing's ever comprehensive with survival. We're always learning. There's always new types of gear, new ways to do things. And as we move up to the macro homesteading scale on the channel, there's always more and more to learn, and we're by no means experts on the channel, but we're learning with you guys. So if there's any winter topics you would like us to touch on, let us know in the comment section below. And if you want something on the lighter side, go check out the video we released earlier today. I'm sure you'll enjoy it, hopefully. If not, let us know in the comment section as well. Thanks for watching, guys. Take care. Canadian Prepper out.